Welcome to Buried Secrets, a podcast about the paranormal, the occult, and weird and forgotten history. I'm Chris. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the history of the Old Alton Bridge, or Goatman's Bridge, in terms of its construction, why it was built, its recent history, etc. And I'll also talk about the only time so far that I have visited this very haunted bridge. But before I get into that, I did want to mention just like a weird, I don't know if you'd even call it a synchronicity, but a weird and kind of ironic trickster related thing that happened with last week's episode. So you may or may not know, probably you don't know, my episodes all cross post to YouTube. They're the same as the episodes that I publish, to regular podcatchers. There's no video or anything. And not many people listen to it on YouTube. The platform's not optimized for podcasts. But after last week's episode, where I talk all about the Goatman's Bridge and the trickster elements at work there, etc., I get this email from YouTube saying that they've taken down the video or, they've privated it because they have reason to believe that I am being deceptive in this episode. Now, my episodes have been cross-posting to YouTube for at least a year and a half, a long time, and I've never gotten any kind of notification like this. I have no idea what flagged it on whatever algorithm or bot or whatever screening they use for things that are supposedly deceptive. I don't think it's that, I was talking about deception, so they assume I was being deceptive. That doesn't make any logical sense. But I thought it was just such a strange thing, right? Like I put out an episode to start out a series that's all about kind of debunking and correcting the record on some of these hauntings and really, exploring and getting into it and trying to figure out where the truth may lie. And YouTube flags it as deceptive and takes it down. So if you are one of the very few people who listen to this on YouTube, definitely check out the episode from last week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcatcher, because the RSS feed has it, but YouTube does not anymore. But yeah, I thought it was just such a weird coincidence or maybe a synchronicity that, I'm starting to talk about trickster elements and YouTube immediately is like, maybe you're the trickster. Anyway, we'll see if they let this episode stay up or not. So let's talk about the history of the Old Alton Bridge. And to be clear, here I'm going to be talking about the history of the literal structure of the bridge and why it was built and that sort of thing. I have multiple episodes where I'm going to talk about the history of the area and the ways that that relates to some of the urban legends about the bridge, etc. But the Old Alton Bridge was constructed in 1884. For you bridge nerds out there, it is the only remaining iron Pratt truss bridge in the country. Now, if you aren't familiar with Pratt truss bridges, the style was invented in 1844, and many bridges were constructed in that style up into the early 20th century. So when I looked up a picture of that type of bridge, I realized that I think of them as basically like railroad bridges. It's basically a flat bridge, as in not an arched bridge, and it has vertical wooden parts and diagonal iron parts connecting the wooden parts to the bottom of the bridge. The bridge is 145 feet long, and it's over a sort of river, the Hickory Creek tributary, and it is at Copper Canyon Road, though the road was rerouted in 1997, or maybe 2001, sources differ, when a new concrete and steel bridge was built. The bridge was built using a kit from the King Iron Bridge Manufacturing Company in Ohio, which apparently supplied many bridges in Texas and around North America. I just love the idea of building a bridge from a kit. Like, I know that people used to build houses from kits, like from the Sears catalog, and I guess they still do, like tiny houses, that sort of thing. But I don't know, a bridge just feels like a different sort of thing, right? It's not like a consumer product, but I like it. So the purpose of this bridge was to create a path for travelers who were going between the larger towns of Denton and Dallas. And it was called the Old Alton Bridge because it was right near a small town called Alton. The location of the bridge had formerly been a popular ford for crossing over with cattle. At the time that the bridge was built, Alton, which had been the county seat from 1850 to 1856, was in a decline. I read on legendsofamerica.com that at its inception, the town of Alton was laid out and they sold lots, but that none of the planned public buildings were actually constructed. Apparently, there was only one residence in town, the home of one W.C. Baines, who had a farmstead there for a while, so county business just happened at his house. However, it sounds like the area lacked potable water, despite being near Pecan Creek and Hickory Creek, so they moved the county seat again, calling the new location Alton. Nice and confusing. The new Alton ended up growing a bit, and it had a hotel, stores, some homes, a blacksmith shop, a school, a church, a saloon, a hotel, and even some doctors and lawyers. However, apparently most people were still unhappy with it as the location of the county seat, so then the county seat was moved again in 1857 to Denton, which was more centrally located and had a better water supply. Now, I'll say I don't 100% understand what was going on with the water, but apparently there were issues in the area with falling water tables, which led to frequent water shortages. Many of the businesses in Alton then moved to Denton. Even the post office was closed in 1859, less than 10 years after the new town of Alton had been established. Nowadays, all that's left of the town is the Hickory Creek Baptist Church and the Old Alton Cemetery, which dates back to 1852 and is right next to the church. However, I think that the original church building is long gone, I think. So let's fast forward to 1884, when the Old Alton Bridge was built. I read in some sources that the hope was that the bridge would help revitalize that area, but it sounds like Alton was basically abandoned at that point, so I don't know what they thought they were going to revitalize. It sounds like the bridge was frequently used to carry traffic from the old postal road, as well as the Ranger Patrol Trail, for the Texas Rangers. At first, horses were used to cross the bridge, but then, of course, later on, once cars were a thing, the bridge was used by cars. There was a problem with that, though, which was that the bridge was a single-lane bridge. So up until the new bridge was open, cars had to honk their horns before crossing and then take turns crossing from each direction. It sounds like it must have been a real pain. It's wild to me to think that I was living in the area very close to the bridge at a time when the old bridge was still in use. I mentioned in the last episode, kind of talking about the area, it's been a place with like a huge population boom. So of course they had to replace that bridge, but honestly, I can't believe it lasted until the late 90s as a solution for traffic going that way. So anyway, the bridge was heavily used up until 1997, when it was declared unsafe for vehicular traffic. So then after that, the bridge was renovated in 1998, and then the Old Alton Bridge was, closed for traffic, and a new bridge opened right next to it. I read that in 2000, the Old Alton Bridge was restored again. They added guardrails to the approaches to the bridge and steel lattice to the sides to keep pedestrians from falling off. They also repainted and refinished it. Before the restoration, the wooden deck of the bridge had been rotting and the abutments were failing. I didn't know what an abutment was, but apparently it's the substructure at either end of a bridge or dam which supports the bridge's superstructure. So in this case, I believe it would be the pillar type things that are below the bridge supporting it. And you can Google a picture of the bridge and see those pillars. I will say, despite the 2 renovations a couple decades ago, the bridge has certainly seen better days. I'm sure it's perfectly safe, to be clear, but I was actually fairly surprised to hear that there had been such a recent restoration of the wooden deck in particular, since it's looking a little rough these days. I would have guessed that it had been a lot more than 20 years since it was last replaced. So in 1988, the bridge was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and it finally became a Texas Historic Landmark in 2010. Apparently it's pretty hard to get things designated as Texas Historic Landmarks, which is why it took so long. Nowadays, it's part of a hiking trail and a bridle trail for horses. So I mentioned in the last episode that despite having grown up very close to the bridge, I had never heard of it. And I was really surprised to find out all these legends about it. So I first heard about the Old Alton Bridge in 2019 when I first heard a podcast episode about it. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was an episode of the podcast Graveyard Tales, though I listened to a ton of paranormal podcasts and could be misremembering. At that point, I'd been living in New York City for more than a decade, and I was surprised to hear of a apparently famous haunted bridge in my old neck of the woods. It just seemed like something I should have heard of before. When I was a teenager, I wasn't much of a driver, but I did drive. And the bridge is so close to where I grew up that I would have been totally fine driving there myself, even though I didn't usually, I didn't like to drive very far, but it was very, very close. And technically, I could have even biked there. And almost nothing in Texas is in walking or biking distance of anything else. And it's certainly not walking distance, not comfortable walking distance from where I grew up, but it would be an easy bike ride to get there. I was pretty bored when I was a teenager. I talked about last time how I just didn't really feel like there was a lot of local history, and of course I was very wrong, but it just felt like a bummer that this cool historic spot was so close to where I grew up and I just never ever visited. And apparently, the bridge is very popular among teenagers in the area, and it's kind of unclear to me if other people at my high school knew about it, and I just somehow didn't hear about it, or what. It seems that everyone who I've mentioned the bridge to has been like, oh yeah, I know that bridge, so maybe I just missed it somehow, or maybe everyone else, like me, heard about it much later. So I first heard about the bridge in 2019. In 2020, we were gonna go to Texas for Christmas, and I was Googling urban legends near my hometown, and I was reminded of the Old Alton Bridge, so I was really excited to check it out, and I planned to go there, when visiting my parents in the area for Christmas, but COVID scuttled those plans, and I had to wait till last Christmas, Christmas 2021, when I was finally in Texas with my family, and I very innocently suggested that we go for a hike, not at the Old Alton Bridge, but at the Elm Fork Hiking and Equestrian Trail, a nearby place that I heard was good for hiking. And, I do love hiking, but, usually when I suggest a hiking location, I do have a bit of an ulterior motive. And I thought my family would just assume that I wanted to go there for paranormal reasons, but for some reason, I guess they just took me at face value when I said I wanted to go to a hiking trail, which just happened to have this interesting historic bridge. So we get to the Old Alton Bridge, and I'll say from the beginning, not everyone in my group was pleased with me for bringing us there. So I thought the trail was extremely muddy, but otherwise fine. That was my main complaint about the bridge. Now, we were there in December 2021. It was not summer. There were no bugs really. So I know the place can get a little bit buggy when it's not cold. But my wife and my mom were not so happy with me for bringing them there. They were just like, what is this weird place that you dragged us to where it looks like everything is falling apart and looks like things aren't very well maintained, which is fair. We didn't spend that much time at the bridge. We walked around some, we took some pictures, we walked maybe a quarter mile down one of the hiking trails. But again, it was extremely muddy, and I felt guilty dragging everyone there. So then, we turned back after a bit and left. I didn't do any kind of paranormal investigation or anything while I was there, but it was definitely cool to see the bridge. And I posted a picture of the bridge on Instagram to see if anyone recognized it, and I was surprised by how many people knew it, since, again, I grew up nearby, I hadn't been familiar with it, but everybody knew about it because of Ghost Adventures and BuzzFeed Unsolved, which I never really watched, but which I know are super popular. So it was very obvious that it was very well known. So later in the series, when I examine all of the specific claims of the paranormal that I've been able to find about the Old Alton Bridge, I'll do a deep dive into Yelp and Google reviews, YouTube comments, and basically anything that mentions the paranormal at that location. But just to set the stage and get some other people's thoughts on what it's like to visit the bridge, I wanted to read a few Yelp and Google reviews to illustrate the type of vibe that the area had, because I don't think I really did it justice by being like, It was fine, it was muddy. My wife and my mom didn't like it. Because it does have a very bad vibe. So in 2019, Christine M. from Gainesville, Texas, gave the Old Alton Bridge 3 stars, saying, "We signed up for a ghost tour on a Friday night from 7 to 11. We encountered a bunch of teens smoking out and a car driving by shooting a handgun out the window. Drive-by shooting in the park. Who does that? It's a cool place other than that." Man, I just love that Yelp review where it's like, look, we came for the ghost tour. There was some casual shooting of guns. It wasn't good, but it's good other than that. Again, I've mentioned bored teenagers in the last episode. I don't know about other places in the US, but in Texas, sometimes bored teenagers get up to some not so great stuff. So there's a lot of that in the Tales of the Bridge. So Richard L. from Frisco, Texas, gave it 1 star in 2021 and said, "I am mystified by these positive reviews. This is a great place to do 2 things: get eaten alive by mosquitoes or be murdered. I came here to take photos. If you enjoy pics of broken televisions and pornographic graffiti, it's a fantastic opportunity. Otherwise, do not stop here unless your car dies. Even then, stay in the car, wait for AAA, and pray." This review just makes me laugh a lot, Okay, the next review gets kind of sarcastic. So Travis M. from Dallas rated it 5 stars in 2018 and says, "Great experience. We went there late at night and there were plenty of locals who were more than happy to lead us off into the woods down dark paths with no cell service. For casual encounters with crackheads and the occasional supernatural sighting that's probably just a robbery taking place, look no further. Bring your family and your favorite self-defense tool." So, again, teenagers making a nuisance of themselves. Russell O. says, "Too many teenagers screaming and using profanity. Might be better on a weeknight. Other than that, the trail is interesting. Lots of history there. 3 stars. But the reviews aren't all bad. Caitlin B. said, "Whether you're, quote, just here for the cult stuff, the history, or the hiking, you really can't lose. As long as you're expecting the graffiti, it's not a bad place to go for an easy hiking trail. It hugs the water. The trail is a lot less secluded than I was expecting. I went on a Tuesday morning and came across several hikers. I wouldn't necessarily bring children to the actual bridge. When I went, the bridge itself had what appeared to be prop blood on it. But if you live in the area, it's a nice piece of history and ghost story. 5 stars. So, as you may have observed, a lot of reviewers complained about the graffiti on the bridge. Allie K., who visited in 2019, posted a picture of a pentagram spray painted on the bridge's wooden deck. When I visited, I did see a pentagram, but it was painted on the concrete near the new bridge, not on the surface of the wooden deck of the bridge. Now, I assume that these pentagrams were spray painted by teenagers who want to be edgy, not by actual Satanists, though who knows. Though to be clear, if the graffiti was by actual Satanists, I personally would not have a problem with that. However, it just seems like a really juvenile thing to do, so my money is on the bored teenagers. I will say that based on the number of reviews complaining about the graffiti, if you were a bored teenager and you wanted to annoy adults, vandalism would be a very effective way to do it because it is really getting people upset. So, again, that's why I think it's a thing that teenagers are doing. Also, none of the graffiti was particularly skillfully done, so I doubt they were the work of adults. I live in New York City, and the graffiti here is mostly very skillfully done and beautifully done. So it is always a shock to see poorly done graffiti, and that to me, I'm always like, okay, it's a teenager, fine. A reviewer named JC describes the vibe of the bridge very, very well. The bridge itself has been somewhat disrespected, but in a kind, Gen Z type way. And for the record, I totally agree with that. It does, the area has a bad vibe, but the actual graffiti and stuff did feel very kind of like Gen Z and kind of fanciful, I think is the word I'm looking for. One reviewer said that the bridge could get pretty crowded with people taking wedding and graduation photos, which, is a really interesting creative choice to me, but one that I respect. Many reviewers said that there were lots of mosquitoes, and one person who was a reptile fan said it was a great place to see snakes, and a bug enthusiast said that it's a great place to find cool beetles and millipedes. Oh, and also there was one review that just said, too many spiders, 3 stars. Folks have also said that you should beware of poison ivy and poison oak, but that there are also beautiful plants in the area. I even saw a picture that someone took of some beautiful wild passion flowers. And I just love passion flowers. I had no idea they grew in the area, but apparently they do. There are also Mustang grapes there, and, sounds like it can be a pretty place in the summer, aside from the bugs. Reviewers have also said that there are wild boars and bobcats in the area. So when we're thinking about things that might be roaming around the woods that people might mistake for something paranormal, keep in mind that there are plenty of animals around. I assume that there are also coyotes, since there are plenty of those in the area, though I don't think I saw anyone mention them. Also, I know there's turkeys in the area. There's a lot of wildlife. So if we're talking about eye shine in the woods or something moving in the woods, later when we get into some of the stories of paranormal occurrences, there are critters out there. Another thing you should know if you perhaps live in the area and want to visit is I don't think there are any restroom facilities there. And also you should bring plenty of water because I'm not sure that I saw any water fountains either. So, it's not the most hospitable hiking trail to visit. But when you get there, there's like this gravel parking lot and then this little gate, and you walk through the gate and then you're like at the bridge. So if you're someone who's maybe not super adventurous, you can get from the parking lot to the bridge in a matter of a minute or less. So you can just visit, just go to the bridge and then leave. So I feel like some of the reviews that I read were a little bit extreme at first. But then when I thought about it and thought about how so many of the reviews mentioned people shooting or having guns, I think at night when people were just like bored hanging out, I think that reviewers might not be 100% off base about the area around the Old Alton Bridge being dangerous because of irresponsible humans, at least sometimes, So I don't like to do paranormal investigations late at night anyway because I like to go to bed early and wake up early. But even if I did, if I were you and you were considering visiting the Old Alton Bridge and doing a paranormal investigation, it seems like the best time to go is during the day on a weekday when kids are in school. I don't think you really want to be there on a weekend. There's going to be a lot of hikers and stuff, or, before or after work on weekdays. I'm sure there's a lot of hikers. And, I probably wouldn't go there late at night to investigate because that's when it seems like kids are, I assume drinking, though I don't think I saw a lot of mentions of drinking, but, doing some substances and maybe bringing some firearms. So, that's not when I would visit the bridge, I would say, but it seems like if you go there during the day, it's fine. When we went, it was totally fine. There was nobody weird there. It was, it was right around Christmas, so there were a few hikers there, not a ton. It was just very quiet and peaceful aside from the weird vibes. So that's what you should know about what it's like to visit and, some advice about if you're considering visiting. And also, now you've got the history of the bridge as well. So that's the big stuff that I wanted to cover this week. Next week, I'm going to get into some really gruesome stuff and upsetting stuff about the history of the area. I'm going to talk about the most famous urban legend about the bridge and kind of the most popular backstory that's been repeated a bunch of times. And basically, I'm going to tell that story, and then I'll get into the actual history that doesn't necessarily validate or confirm the veracity of that urban legend, but that shows that many, many, many things like that urban legend happened in the area. So that's what you can look forward to next time. In the meantime, you can follow me on Instagram at Buried Secrets Podcast. You can check out the show notes with the sources and the notes for this episode at buriedsecretspodcast.com. If you liked this episode, please tell your friends about it. Please rate and review on whatever podcatcher you're listening to this on, though especially Apple and Spotify. And also, I have a Patreon. I've got some fun stuff on there, including the Haunted New York City map, which I added a few locations to last week. I found out about a couple haunted theaters that I hadn't heard of previously. I have a number of haunted theaters on the map, but I added a few more, including a few haunted theaters that are no longer there, but the ghost stories are still online about them, so I included some of those. I've also got my Solo Estes method kit, and I also have what I'm calling the Secret Library, which is a curated collection of public domain books where I'm uploading a new book every week that, is related to the paranormal, the occult, or weird and forgotten history. And I think this week I'm going to upload this book from the 19 teens that's basically like a guide on how to speak with ghosts and, the spirits of departed people. It's got some fun tips in there. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be up by the time I publish this episode. And that's all I got. Thanks so much for listening.